We have David Seymour on the line now. He is here to talk to us a bit about ACT's Real Change budget. So that's the alternative budget that they have announced this morning. David, are you there?
Loud and clear. Annie, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. Thank you so much for coming on to my very first attempt at being behind the mic.
Well, so far you're sounding great.
Thank you. Now, this morning you've had a big announcement about how ACT would approach the budget. Can you give us a summary of what you think is important in this year's budget?
Yeah, look, I think the most important thing is that political parties have to not only oppose and criticise, but also propose a better way forward. We've put forward an alternative budget that would kill inflation dead by getting the government's books back into surplus next year, i.e. straight away, rather than in 2025 as the current government's proposing. It would deliver tax cuts right across the board. So, say a nurse on 70 grand would pay $2,300 less tax straight away. We'd also put in place a very simple tax system with 2 tax rates instead of the current 6. And that is important not only for administration and fairness. What it would also do is send a message that your money is yours. If you work hard, save, invest, and have a good income, we're not going to subject you to a labyrinth of punishment that is 6 different tax rates to try and take as much of your money as possible.
And you've
so
said,
those are just a few of the starting points.
Yes, yeah. So with your 2-rate tax system, you've got 17.5% if you are earning less than 70k and 28% if you are earning more than 70k. The obvious question that will come at you from the left is, how are you going to pay for everything by reducing tax by so much?
We actually identify $6.8 billion of what we regard as wasteful government spending. So that allows us to reduce expenditure, reduce taxes, but we're reducing expenditure more than taxes, so we get the government back into surplus. Let me give you a few examples of that wasteful expenditure. Mm-hmm. Right now, we borrow on the international debt markets $1 billion a year and put that money into people's KiwiSaver with a $500 subsidy. We give it to people whether they're wealthy or poor, and I just don't think that that is a good use of taxpayer funds. It's certainly not a good use of New Zealand's future taxpayers who are dealing with the debt we've racked up over COVID. We have gone from 47,000 full-time equivalent bureaucrats to 61,000 FTEs over the past 4 years under Labor. I can't find anyone who tells us that we have a better public service or we get higher quality services as a result. We could save $2 billion by no longer doing that. We spend $750 million a year on fees free for the first year of tertiary education. That is not increasing the access to education for poor kids. If it was getting poor kids into education where they otherwise wouldn't have been, you'd say maybe that's a good investment in the future. It's actually just a transfer of wealth to middle and upper class household, or kids from middle and upper income households. And I don't think that putting more debt onto their future is actually worth spraying cash around to win elections. So
and you
go through it.
You have seemed to have put a little bit of a focus on education here. So you have the point, pay good teachers more. So how do you propose to qualify and quantify that?
So there's actually 3 areas besides getting defence up to 2% of GDP to match Australia, mm-hmm. and sharing GST on construction with council. So there's 3 years where it's been more. But if you're asking about the Teaching Excellence Reward Fund, or TERF, that is designed to give principals a fund of $5,000 per teacher in their school. But the kicker is they don't have to give $5,000 to each teacher. They might choose to give a bonus to science, technology, engineering and maths or STEM teachers because they're very hard to get. Mm-hmm. They might choose to reward teachers that contribute to co-curricular activities. They might pay teachers more who are mentors and leaders for up-and-coming staff. So we have a whole range of possibilities for how a principal might decide to use it, but it's up to them to decide how they distribute this extra cash to get the best out of teaching in their school.
Right, and you mentioned defence. Why do you think it's important that we raise our spending to 2% of GDP?
Well, I wish it wasn't, but the sad reality is the world's changed recently, and actually it's probably more accurate to say it's just gone back to where it always has been. We've always had a human nature that has an incredibly cruel and nasty side. We're seeing that in Europe right now. We're seeing the Chinese People's Liberation Army, as they call it, establishing a naval base in the Solomon Islands, just 2,000 kilometres of Australia. We need to have New Zealand participating in an ANZAC defence force that is fully interoperable. The first step to that is matching Australia's defence spending as a percentage of GDP.
That makes a lot of sense. And another thing that stood out to me when I was having a look at your real change budget is that you would end the oil and gas ban and repeal the Zero Carbon Act. So would that mean that you would actively bring back the oil and gas industry, Marsden Point and other places? What does that mean for those who might have previously worked in those industries? Does it mean their jobs will return?
Well, ultimately, the question is up to private businesses. It's up to the shareholders at Marsden Point. It's up to the oil companies that have previously invested in exploration in New Zealand. We can't force them to do business here, but what we can do is stop creating such a hostile regulatory environment that nobody wants to do business in New Zealand. We would get rid of the Zero Carbon Act because we already have a climate policy that caps New Zealand's emissions, and that is the emissions trading scheme. If the emissions are already capped, then any other climate policy is really just picking winners, shifting money around, and commanding and controlling the economy. That's what the Zero Carbon Act does with these budgets for carbon emissions for different industries. It's bureaucracy and it's nuts, and it doesn't change the overall emissions from New Zealand because they're already capped under the ETS. So we get rid of all of that. Yes, I suspect that it would be a good thing for industry, and especially heavy industry in New Zealand, to stop being so hostile. But to answer your question, would particular businesses decide to invest and give people jobs? I can't say that because we respect the rights of private property owners and businesses to make their own decisions, but I'm pretty sure that you're more likely to have a job in one of those industries if the government just stopped attacking them.
Fair enough. And is it true that in order to cut spending, you would look at getting rid of some of the lower performing parts of government? So Ministry of Women and Human Rights Commission and TPK, I think. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. Look, there's some things we'd keep. We'd certainly, some people ask, what about Ministry for Disabilities? We'd certainly keep that. Some people ask, what about treaty settlements? We're committed to completing the treaty settlement process. But you've got a whole lot of ministries that are not there for any policy purpose, like how do we make sure the world's an accessible place for the disabled. We have a Ministry for Ethnic Affairs, a Ministry for Women, a Human Rights Commission. These ministries don't actually do anything that makes New Zealanders' lives better. And if we seriously think that the rest of the government is not following the Human Rights Act, is that education, for example, has forgotten to teach girls, that healthcare has forgotten about women, then we've got a much bigger problem than a Ministry of Women is ever going to solve. I believe that we need to treat all New Zealanders equally based on their human dignity, rather than having particular ministries focused on particular types of human.
And just finally, you've noted that 1 in 4 of those born in New Zealand now live overseas. How do we stop the brain drain, as it's called, from our best and brightest heading overseas?
Well, we've got to recognise we're now engaged in a full-scale war for talent. Coming out of COVID, Australia, Canada, they've had the welcome mats out. They've had their immigration services actually advertising for talent inside New Zealand with targeted Google ads. We need to get real about this. If we want people to come here and invest here and make New Zealand a prosperous first world country, then we have to have low, flat, competitive tax rates, a bureaucracy that delivers high-quality services for the money allocated, and a regulatory environment that celebrates success and hard work, rather than one that is constantly looking for ways to take it off people. If we get all of those things right, then New Zealand can again become a place that people want to come to and invest in and be again a prosperous country.
Thank you so much for joining us today and sharing a bit of insight into your real change budget. We hope that you'll join us again.
Oh, I hope so too. Doing well, Annie. Have a great day.
Thank you. Bye.